Berlin to Heidelberg to the World Wide Web. My name is Linda Kagerbauer, and I'm happy to welcome you to our feminist event series, Aschunen I Dikhen, Listen and Watch. I'm the co-curator, and I'm really happy to be here tonight with you. And I'm working in the Department of Women Affairs, and there I'm responsible for girl politics and culture. And I have the pleasure to do this event series with you, Ursula.
Yeah, hi. My name is Ursula Schmidt-Palmer. I am an independent filmmaker and have been entrusted with curating this series of events.
And this series of events is a cooperation with the Anne Frank Educational Center and the Kinothek Asta Nielsen in Frankfurt. Hello to you as well. And now we just want to tell you a little bit of the idea and the spirit of our event and the series of events, because we already opened it in September with a concert and a reading by and with Dotchi Reinhardt in the Brotfabrik, a cultural place in Frankfurt. And so we have conceived a series of events that take place at different locations in Frankfurt. It is also an attempt to contribute to a different form of visibility and remembrance of the stories of Ronja and Synthese together with cultural institutions in the city of Frankfurt, to take responsibility and to show responsibility. The German Film Museum, the Historical Museum, the Mosautum, and today the Bildungsstätte Anne Frank as a digital space are involved.
Our events build on an earlier film and discussion series that was organized by Kinothek Asta Nielsen and happened 2019 under the banner of Revision, nja-Bürgerrechts-Bewegung und Kämpfe gegen Antiziganismus. It had been curated by Gabi Babic and myself. Thank you, Gabi. And we are very happy and proud that our event is also part of the AKE DIKHEA Festival of Romani Film in Berlin. Warm greetings to the audience online and in Movimiento Neukölln, Berlin. At AKE DIKHEA 2018, we saw the film Taikon, co-directed by Lawen Mohtadi for the first time, and were overwhelmed. And we are very happy that after our event tonight, it is possible to stream the whole documentary online via the AKE DIKHEA website for €2. You will find it online. Yeah, watch it. It's really amazing. Now, with our series and this event, we tried and keep trying to create solidarity, alliances, and networks from our Gagé perspectives. Beyond fighting racist stereotypes, we want to create space for the perspectives of the artists and activists involved. We hope our brief selection reflects the diversity of current political and artistic positions and strategies.
Yes, and the participants will show their perspectives on bodies, everyday life, and politics in form of films, music, words, and performances. It's all about the power of definition and self-determination. And here I see art and culture as important and central political places that make it possible to show and change social conditions, especially in times of a pandemic. We think culture and art is spaces for encounter and formability. And at the same time, it is important to criticize and to address systematic and structural exclusion in cultural institutions, like sexism, racism, and all these intersectional connections. Because which perspectives are represented, which are not, which stories are told and which are not. This is why for us it's so important to make a series that shows the perspective of women and queers and their artistic and political interventions and actions and their historical struggles, like we will discuss it tonight. Together, we want to reflect on current challenges in the context of social inequality, right-wing violence, as well as anti-feminist and anti-Ziganist mobilization, and strengthen feminist and intersectional alliances. So that's the name of the program, By Listening and Watching. And we warmly welcome you to also join the other events. I think we will just post the flyer into the chat so that you have the possibility to be a part of that series and to find ways to connect, to listen, to watch, and to learn. Yeah, and we are very happy to learn from you tonight, Radmila and Lawen. You will introduce them, right?
Yeah. There's one last thing we have to mention, and this is in 2022. The series will lead into an exhibition by the Anne Frank Educational Center on the perspectives of Romnia and Sintice in Hessen. And now I'm very pleased to welcome our guest of today, Lawen Mohtadi from Sweden. Lawen is a journalist, writer, and documentary filmmaker. She is the author of The Day I Am Free, a biography on the Swedish Roma writer and activist Katarina Taikon. The book was critically acclaimed when it was released in 2012, winning 4 awards. She also co-directed the documentary film Taikon, which was released in 2015 and based on her book. Currently, she is a senior editor at Nature and Culture, Natur och Kultur, one of Sweden's major publishing houses.
We're
great to have you.
Happy, yeah.
And we are also happy Radmila Mladenova, who offered to moderate the talk. Before moving to Germany, Radmila Mladenova had worked for several human rights organizations in Bulgaria. Radmila is a literary and film scholar based in Heidelberg, Germany. Currently, she coordinates the Explorer project Artistic Alternatives to the Anti-Gypsy Gaze at the Research Center on Anti-Gypsyism, RCR, at the University of Heidelberg. In January 2021, she defended her PhD thesis, The White Mask and the Gypsy Mask, in film at the Institute of Slavic Studies in Heidelberg. She also organized 2 international conferences, Anti-Gypsyism and Film, and Visual Dimensions of Anti-Gypsyism. We are very happy to have you. So the stage is all yours. We are looking forward to your talk.
See you later.
Ursula. Thank you, Linda, for the great presentation, for the invitation. Hello to everyone in Berlin and Frankfurt, all over the world who are watching us, also in YouTube. Hi, Lawen.
Hi.
It's a great privilege to share the space with you and to talk about Taikon. I'm also very excited, and I have prepared 2 beginnings of our conversation, and I will start with that. And so my first introduction is the word inspiration. I thought, I envy everyone who has still not seen Taikon, because I know they will experience inspiration. And there are different types of artworks, some that inform, some that entertain, but I think that a very special kind of artworks is the one that fill you with inspiration, with spirit, the moment when you feel that your chest fills up with motion and you want to do something creative. And you also ask yourself, is my life up to the challenges of our present time? I mean, this is how I experienced Taikon watching the film. My second introduction to your work, Lawen, is this great book. It was published 2019, so it's still a very new one. It's the English translation of your book that you published 2012, and actually. It's not just your biography of Taikon called The Day I'm Free. It is 3 in 1. So it contains the biography translated into English. It also gives kind of a short overview of the exhibition that was organized 2012 about the Katitzi series called Katitzi's Journey Through Sweden. So it was an exhibition that traveled in Sweden and was also shown in the Czech Republic and Hungary. And then the third part of the book, which is also gorgeous, is a translation of the first volume of Katitzi, a book that Taikon wrote in the span of 11 years with marvelous illustrations. And I really like what it's written on the back cover of the book, and I'll read it. Lawen Mohtadi's biography brought renewed attention to Taikon's literary and activist work and created a cultural reckoning that identified Taikon, one of the most important Swedish human rights fighters of the 20th century. The English edition of the book was published 2019. 2015 came up the documentary film Taikon, the untold story of a Roma freedom fighter. Some years earlier, 2012, you came up with your debut biography. And this is how things look when we have the perspective from today looking backwards, when all this books and exhibitions and the film are already a fact. But I thought it's very important to change the perspective, and that's my first question to you, and to think of how it felt for you in that first moment when you were looking towards the future, and probably you had no idea that your book will be such a source of inspiration for so many other people, how it was for you looking forward with this idea to write Katarina Taikon's biography. How did you come up with this idea? What inspired you? And how did you hold on to this inspiration? Because I think this is very important.
Thank you so much, Radmila, for your generous introduction. You are so right. This has been a project over the course of some years now, more than a decade. And I want to say just how it all started for me. So my background is as a journalist. I used to work in the public Swedish radio. And so one day when I was out of ideas, I walked down to the small little library in the radio building. And so my eyes came upon this book that had just been published. And it was a book about the history of Roma in Sweden. It was like a pretty short book, but very sort of like an introduction almost. And so on the cover of this book, there's a photograph of a woman standing in a square in Stockholm, and she's surrounded by people, and she has an intense look in her face. And you can tell that she's trying to say something, convey something important to the audience. And so you can also see in the photo that this is a photo that's not from our time. You know, it looks 60, like from the 60s, something like that. And so on top of this is a brown woman in Stockholm, in Sweden. And so all my interest immediately sparks, and I'm like, who is this person? And so I read about her. Of course, it's Katarina Taikon. She has a short chapter in this book, and I want to know more about her. So I go back to my desk. I start Googling her, like, what can I read about this person? To me, I think I have maybe heard the name, but she was not a person who I was like familiar with. And so when I started Googling her, I realized there's nothing written on her. And I also realized that she has an older sister, because Katarina herself, she passed away in the 90s. So her older sister was named Rosa. And so Rosa, I definitely knew about because she was a very, very prominent artist and silversmith in Sweden. And so I called Rosa Taikon and I said, hello, I'm this journalist. Like, I'm so interested in like your sister's work. Could I interview you? And so I go to Rosa's house. She lived in northern Sweden in the beautiful, like old school, you know, that she had renovated, and that was her studio and her home. And so meeting Rosa for the first time, I realized this is a spectacular history and nobody has written about this. And so this is how also the idea for the book came about. And I mean, I will tell you this, Radmila, I did not expect this to become, you know, in any way to be something that, you know, becoming something that the whole nation would sort of like, you know, pay interest to or open somebody's eyes, you know, on that level. And I remembered a friend of mine who said, you know, you're one strange brown woman and you're going to write a book about another strange brown woman. And so, and we laughed so much about that because it was like, you know, a weird person is going to write a book about another weird person. But this says something also maybe about like, you know, the atmosphere in Sweden surrounding issues of discrimination, issues of racism, issues of like identity and belonging. So, and these questions I have, you know, always been interested in and done a lot of work around. So that's sort of how it all started.
Well, I would say that your film is one of its kind. I was trying to think other films that give such detailed, such profound portraits of Roma civil rights activists, and to be honest, I can't think of a film of that quality in terms of research, in terms of understanding that it creates for the protagonist. And I think that this has a lot to do with the research you have done. And I was thinking I can mention some names of Roma activists who deserve similar films, but films that have still not been made, like Melanie Spita, or Agnes Daroci from Hungary, or the English civil rights activist Ronald Lee, or the Romanian one Nicolae Gheorghe, or the American one Ian Hancock. And I'm saying this because I hope that in the audience there are people with inspiration, with ideas, with the capacity to do something. And I think there's so many untold stories that are out there. And your film is really gives a model of what it means, also a good film. And that's why I want to ask you how you went about with your research. What were the principles you follow? What were the ideas that you stuck to and insisted upon when writing and creating the image of Katarina Taikon on paper? And also later in film, of course.
Well, what I had to start with for sure was to understand who were the close people in Katarina Taikon's life. This was my first question. And so, of course, one of them was her older sister, Rosa, who also herself was a public person. So she was used to this kind of question that I posed to her, which is, you know, will you allow me to enter this world and to write like a very detailed book about your sister? Because without Rosa and also without the rest of Katarina Taikon's family, for example, her daughter, Angelica Ström, who is also part of the book and the film, without them, it would just not be possible. And without them, I don't think I would have wanted to do that, because I wanted to be something that they felt good about. So the first thing was like really mapping sort of her family and her close circle of friends and colleagues and activists. And so the first thing I started doing was interviews. And so, one thing leads to another. I then did a timeline about her life. Over her life. She was born in the 30s and she passed in the 90s. So, I was trying to sort of document all of the years, she lived. And Sweden is very famous for having keeping old archives. The church had a very large role in doing that. So, anytime somebody's born, anytime somebody dies, anytime somebody moves, all of these records are sort of accessible in Sweden. And so that helped me also document, so that I could also understand, when did this happen in her life. But in the case of Katarina Taikon's family, up until she was 13 years old, they were not allowed to become permanent, to have like a permanent home. So she did not have an address, basically, before the age of 13. So also that was unusual, researching somebody from Sweden, because those things we usually know. Another big step for me was also to research the time and the era, because I wanted to, it was very important for me to place Katarina and her siblings' lives, her family's lives in the context. What kind of Sweden, was she born into in 1932? And so to do this, you have to also, go back and read, I guess, history. And also there were different kinds of laws, that apply to Roma people, traveling people at that time. So I had to also figure out, how did these laws come about? So the whole historical and social and political context in the book is sort of intertwined, because I find it impossible, to speak about the races of the time, without going into exactly what kinds of policies and regulations and even just like, the climate of a place, the climate of society. I was looking a lot for newspaper articles and how did the Swedish journalists, how did they write about Roma people of that time? It was, you can find incredible things that will just give you the whole sense and feeling of the discourse, basically. So I think, it was also my first book. So I didn't know if I did right, but what I did have with me was methods from journalism. I knew how to make interviews. I knew how to look up facts. Of course, I also had an editor, so we could talk about it, and he could also guide me in certain ways. So it was all of these layers, like moving forward in a parallel way.
How long did you work on the book?
So the interview that I did with Rosa after the first time we met, that became an article in a magazine. And that first article came out 2006. And also that's when I started thinking about the book. And then it was sort of like in my head for like 3-4 years. And then in 2010, I started like really full-time working on it. So it took me basically, I would say about 5 years. But then I had periods where I worked very slowly, and then some periods where I, it was full time, like 10 hours a day. I was just doing the book,
So you've spent like 15 years of your life, like calculating. I mean, Katarina Taikon has had a really transformative effect on your life as well, hasn't she?
That's true. I haven't thought of that, but that's true.
Yeah,
that's true. 15 years.
I was wondering, like in a book, you can make certain things that you cannot do in a film, and the other way around. In a film, you can show things that you cannot show in a book. So we're moving towards the film, and then I want us to see this first scene that we have prepared for tonight. But before we come to this scene, I wanted to ask you, how do you see the relationship between the book and the film? They kind of complement each other. How do you see it from the writers and filmmakers' perspective?
Well, to me, I think the wonderful thing about the film is that we get to see Katarina Taikon speak herself. I think, nothing beats that, because she is so incredibly present, so incredibly, thoughtful and observant. And the way that she speaks, her message really goes through. And I always find her to be this kind of, she's very sharp. She speaks a lot with integrity, but she never, she sort of never like gets upset with people. And if you think about somebody in her situation, that she has basically put on her own shoulders to make sure that the community she comes from will have the same equal rights as other Swedish people, which was a huge job that she took on, because the situation was so bad. If you think of her in that situation, I would think I would be just constantly angry, but she's not. And I think what the film shows is like really her brilliance in this regard, that she is, she's constantly striving for, dialogue, and she's constantly, she believes in the power of, communication, I would say, in lack of, but so that I think makes the film so special, I would say. Both her, that we get to see her in action, and also that I do think that it's clear in the book that she was so incredibly loved by the people around her, but I think more in the film.
Yes, yeah, that's true. And I mentioned it, but only in our private conversations. Watching the film, it's a documentary. I had a feeling it's like a fiction film. It has this immersive effect of a fiction film. It kind of draws you into the world of Katarina Taikon, and at the end, you don't think, oh, I watched a documentary. It was like I was part of her life. I was part of her fight. I think that's very strong as well. But I want us to see the first scene already. I think we have to wait some 10 seconds for it's the technical time needed for this scene to be shown. And I would encourage the audience to send us questions. We are curious with Lawen what questions you might have watching this scene, listening to our conversation to Lawen's perspective as an author, as a creator.
De började studera på Birkagården och där gick de väl i 3 år i alla fall. Och Rosa och hennes man och Björn och Katarina. Alltså de njöt av detta. De verkligen njöt av skolan. Alltså.
Det är där på skolan som vi får hitta manifestet om de mänskliga rättigheterna. Och det säger Katarina, men Rosa, har du sett vad det står i den här boken? Det står faktiskt att alla har rätt till bostad, har rätt till skola, utbildning, arbete. Men alla våra släktingar, kusiner, tanter och farbröder bor ju i lägergetton i Hammarby, Täppan, Ekstubben, överallt runt Stockholm. Det här är ju inte riktigt. Är det bara du och jag som ska vara så privilegierade, säger hon. Och lite senare då börjar det här arbetet som Katarina sätter igång med.
Nyheter från TT.
Ett kraftfullt debattinlägg med självbiografisk bakgrund i en fråga som borde vara angelägen för oss alla gör Katarina Taikon med en bok som kommit i bokhandeln idag. Den heter Zigenerska.
Jag vill att människor ska se logiskt och tänka klart, och det är inga märkvärdigheter jag säger i min bok.
Skolgång, bostäder, en möjlighet till att arbeta. Vi ska ha precis samma möjligheter som alla andra svenska medborgare har.
Den här boken Zigenerska är lite grann en blandning av medborgarrättsbibel, memoarer och kåserier och livsöden. Men det var en bok som verkligen slog igenom på ett ganska makalöst sätt.
I really like the moment with the lights. When we see how the lights are being turned on in this dark Stockholm. It's a very nice detail.
Good.
I also thought that, again, we have a book that has a transformative effect. And this is Katarina Taikon's autobiography, or a collection of texts compiled as autobiography called Gypsy Woman. Can you tell us a little bit more about that book? Because we cannot read it in Swedish and it's not part here. So it would be interesting to know what's the story of the book, what is to be found inside the book, and what it means also to have this book written in Swedish.
Yes, absolutely. So the book came out in 1963. It is Katarina Taikon's first book. And with this book, she becomes sort of like almost like a superstar overnight. This is being reviewed everywhere. She's being interviewed in TV, at the radio. So this is a lot, this is a major event in Sweden. And so the book in itself, it's sort of like a mix between autobiography. She speaks about her family, where they come from, in sort of also in general, just giving, some kind of brief overview about, who are the Roma people, what is Roma culture, what are traditions that are important to us, things like that. And so the second part of it is, looks at the social situation of that time. And this is a way for her to, really introduce this question as a political question. This is like she's framing this in a political way. And I think that is one of the biggest challenges that she has, because in this time, in the early 60s, the institutional racism, and also the sort of everyday racism that is just present in people's life, it is very, very socially acceptable. There's sort of no problem about it. There's no problem that Roma people will not access housing or education, or that, you can speak about Roma people in a certain way. It's just part of the ordinary life. And so when she comes and she looks at this and says, this is oppression, this is we are being held out, from our basic human rights. It's why it becomes so huge, because it just makes people look at this with completely new eyes. So that is what the book does. And so after, when the book comes out, she starts traveling all around Sweden, showing up at small towns, big towns, community centers, libraries. And so this is a way for her also, to use that as a platform to go out there as an educator.
Maybe, we are into the story of Taikon, both of us, but I just thought there are certainly people in the audience who don't know anything about her. So maybe it's good if you also give the frame of her biography, so that one can understand where she comes from.
Yes, absolutely. So Katarina Taikon, she was part of a family of 4 siblings. Her father they had come, before Sweden, they had lived in Russia for many years. So they considered themselves Russian Roma. So her father was Roma, and they immigrated to Sweden in the end of the 19th century, or somewhere beginning of 20th century, together with, the story goes, together with 6 other Roma families. And so in Sweden, that group of people who immigrated at that particular time, we call them the Swedish Roma. In today's, it's kind of funny because it's but so in Sweden, different parts of of Roma communities are being defined, according to when they immigrated. So, you have the Roma who immigrated 500 years ago, and then Katarina's family, that's now 120 years ago. And then it's, the Roma from, say, Poland in the 70s. And so this is like how the different, communities are being spoken of in Sweden. But so Katarina's father was Roma from Russia, and her mother was non-Roma. And so they met in the city of Gothenburg in the 20s, and they had worked in the same restaurant. And her father, they were Keldrash, and her father was famous for being a musician. He was also a coppersmith, a silversmith, and also...
Your mic is off.
Oops, sorry. I was also gonna add, it's also said in the Roma community that he was the first Roma person in Sweden who started to, what do you say, like amusement park, we say Tivoli. Is this word translate? Yeah.
But amusement park, I think everyone understands.
Yeah. Yes.
And yeah.
So then Katarina, she is the fourth child in that family. And during her childhood, the common policy was to not let Roma people settle. So even though, a part of the year they wanted to travel for work, especially the summer periods, even though they wanted to settle, even though they wanted to have a house somewhere, they could not. So this was one of the big issues for Katarina and for her family and for the whole Roma community in Sweden at that time, especially, this community that they belong to. And this also led to the fact that the children couldn't be, they couldn't go to school because they didn't have any addresses. So it's just led to so many kind of different, problems for so many Roma people. And Katarina has written all about this extensively in her books.
So I was wondering, I don't know when she went for the first time to school and how her education developed, but I wonder how in your opinion she developed as such a influential writer. I mean, to write a book and to have it in all newspapers reviewed is an achievement. How does she manage that? What did she do? What was it that brought her to this position?
Yeah, I mean, so you're right about her schooling. She did not go to school a lot as a child. I think, she went maybe one full year, like maximum 1.5. She then was married off when she was 14 years old. That didn't turn out great. She ran away from that. And so one thing led to another. But, when she was then 16 years old and both her parents had passed, she then, starts living a life and starts working. And the next time she goes back to school is when she's 26 years old. And so both her and Rosa, her older sister, chooses this school. They go there for 2 years. And Rosa is... by then, Rosa is 32 years old. And so Rosa knows exactly what she wants to do. She wants to become an artist, a silversmith, and she applies to the art college in Stockholm, and she is accepted. But Katarina, she's not sure what she wants to do. There are some interviews with her before she becomes this kind of like really this public figure. She says to one of the journalists that maybe she wants to become a social worker because she said, I want to help my people to get out of this difficult situation. And so it turns then out she does this kind of combination of being, a writer and activist and social worker. And so to come to your question, like, how did she manage to write this book? Because it is truly a great book, I think that it's a combination of things. I think definitely one of the largest things is like, just her own creativity and her own mind, that she's a thinker, she's an intellectual person, even though she has missed out so much on school, on studying, she really craves for knowledge. And I think this was in her spirit. I think another part of it is that she had people around her that encouraged her to write, that said, like, you have something special to tell. I think both, like, in terms of like people around her in her network, but also in her intimate sphere, she was very encouraged by her husband, her longtime partner. His name was Björn. And so Björn was also, he said, I think they discussed these issues, so much and try to always, work around these things together. So I think also Björn gave her the courage to really take this seriously and to sort of, do her thing, which is really approaching this in a very critical political way.
I like very much your explanation, because I think that it is the gaze of the other that makes you. And like, we wouldn't have been here if you hadn't seen Katarina Taikon the way you have seen her, and she couldn't have developed the way she developed if it wasn't for the people around her who loved her and who saw her. I think it's something that you discover again and again, that we create each other, and it's everyone is responsible of how you look at other people and how you create them with the way you look at them.
Yes.
I would suggest that we see the next scene. The time is running really quick. We have not that many film scenes, but they're also good. So I wouldn't like that we don't show them now that they are prepared.
1965, då hade Katarina lyckats med konststycket att för första gången vi svenska romer skulle få gå i ett första maj-tåg för vår egen sak. Det var en fantastisk upplevelse att när vi gick då längs mot Gärdet från Humlegården så hoppade folk spontant in i vårt tåg för att visa sin solidaritet och medkänsla.
Just den där demonstrationen var så slående, alltså, att det fortfarande var sån orättvisa i Sverige att man måste demonstrera för att få gå i skolan.
Det mest konkreta, så att säga, kamporganet var då Senarsamfundet. Och det hade en väldigt viktig funktion i att skapa de första skolan.
Vad står det där? Kan du läsa högt?
Ja. Så skall
såg
Vi var en liten armé av kämpare. Ibland gick vi framåt, ibland fick vi retirera bakåt.
Finns det väl all anledning att fortsätta den här formen av undervisning som de här eleverna begär?
Ja, det finns starka skäl för det. Men å andra sidan så är det ju vissa tekniska svårigheter. Det ska skaffas lärare, det är kostnader och dylikt.
Ja, då kan jag tala om för statsministern att lärare har redan ringt och anmält sig och det finns möjligheter att få fram lärare. Och vad kostnaden beträffar så är det ju i varje fall en 9-årig grundskola som har gått förlorad och det här rör sig om 2 års utbildning.
Ja, det är onekligen argument som talar för kursens fortsättande. Vi ska pröva även de argumenten.
Nu kan vi hoppas kanske på en ljus framtid.
Ja, vi ska pröva ärendet nu. Jag hoppas kan man ju alltid.
Då gör vi det.
Well, I think here we will need you to give us the context.
And I like this excerpt because she's interviewing the Prime Minister of Sweden. And so, this is 1964, 1965. And so the main issue that Katarina Taikon and the other activists around her, the main issue that they combated first was the issue of housing, because it was really bad. Some people were living in tents, some people were living in small vans. And so that was just the urgent issue. But so when they started seeing that, that kind of work gave effect, people actually got houses. So that the second issue for them to address was the issue of education. And so not only the children, the Roma children in Sweden at that time, not only were they excluded from the school system because they were excluded, they had lived in camps, or as Rosa Taikon would say, in ghettos. And so you couldn't put your child in a school, these camps were far outside of the city. There was no transport or communication. And so the children was definitely excluded, but also the adult Roma in Sweden at that time, they thought maybe something around 80% couldn't write and read. And so this is Katarina Taikon's attempt to start education programs for adults. And as you could see in that clip, there was sort of like a small committee that went to the Prime Minister, and they had, of course, lobbied for a really long time to get an appointment with him. And so some of the people in that committee were the first students of the adult education that they sort of tried out as an experiment during the summer of 1964. And so when they saw that that was a success, they started education programs for adult people in, I think, 6 or 7 cities all around Sweden. And why I think it's so great and also so funny with her meeting the Prime Minister is that, she has clearly taken the role of the journalist. So she must have agreed with the TV journalist that, yes, okay, I'll do the interview. And she knows, of course, exactly what she's talking about. She has all the facts there. And so I just love the way that she's trying to be polite and say, like, there are no reasons for you or the government to deny this. So both, it's a very important sort of like political action, but it's also, if you also think about Katarina Taikon, she just a year ago, became a name in the public debate, so she really quickly quickly, took these steps to really place herself in this debate. And I think she was also, today maybe you would call her like a brilliant PR strategist or something, but I think she was good at that.
We have one question from Berlin, our first question, and it is, why was the policy to not allow Roma settle applied in Sweden, and how this affected the Roma across the country?
The question was why?
Yeah.
Well, this goes back a few decades. So there was sort of like a big shift in the 40s, I would say. Before the 40s, there was reasons for Roma people to travel during a certain period of the year, because their skills and their jobs and their income was dependent on them traveling and working in different places, arriving in a new town and offering your services, basically. So the kind of jobs that they could offer at that time, it was things that people needed. So in terms of commercial work was the amusement park, or say the coppersmith work, because the pots and the pans that we used to cook in, they were made from copper. And so you needed somebody who could, treat these things so that the copper didn't contaminate the food. So these kinds of work that a lot of Roma people had, and this kind of skill set that they have, it was asked for and required, it really gave them an income. But so in the 40s, this shift began where the aluminum came and replaced the copper, so that anybody who had, worked with copper was no longer really, it wasn't really asked for or going so well. Also, the amusement parks really as something fun to do, with kids or with family, really started going down. There were other things that people, rather did. So when the Roma community in Sweden realized that there were no longer any reason for them to travel, they understood, okay, then we have to become permanent settle. And this is then when the problem starts, because Sweden, throughout the whole 20th century, have a discriminatory policy that Roma people can only stay in one place for 3 weeks. And so you ask why? Well, it's because of racism. So this discriminatory policy was still in use when so many Roma people wanted to settle in the big cities, in Stockholm, in Malmö, in Gothenburg. And so when the different cities, the municipalities, they didn't want to accept this, then they created these camps, which were far out, outside of town. They were mostly, in the forest. You couldn't easily get into town. You could, unless you had a car, you couldn't basically, have a job to go to in an easy way. So this is why we had the camps. And you might say, okay, but there are these kinds of settlements, these kinds of camps throughout Europe for Roma people. One big issue with Sweden at that time, or one condition, was that Sweden at this time is one of the, has undergone a huge transformation. We went from being really poor agricultural society to becoming one of the most modern, egalitarian societies in the world. if you say the word Sweden, people think of good stuff, you know, they think of healthcare, they think of like the welfare system, of like gender equality, all of these things. And so in the 60s, when this was really the self-image of Swedish people and the Sweden as a nation, at the same time, you had this discriminatory policy going on. And so this was a clash, you know, and so like politicians, they couldn't defend this contradiction, because of course Roma people were Swedes, they had been there for a long time, and they were even Swedish citizens, they had passports, you know. So this was the reason to why you know, the whole situation became like that.
So I was thinking, if you can summarize the change that Taikon effected, what would you say? I mean, what did she manage to do politically? How did she manage to change Swedish society?
So I would say there were three parts. So one is empty the camps. She got everybody housing. She made sure that those sort of like that change of policy were given to everybody. The second was the whole issue of education, where she and this network of activists she worked with, they made the politicians start education programs for the adult people, the adult Roma. And I think number three is that she, through her, you know, her talks and her books and her articles and her voice just in the, you know, public discourse, I think that she made people understand that, you know, there is something here in Swedish society that's called racism. And she brought this into the context of Sweden, because Swedish people lived, you know, according to this idea that racism always exists somewhere else. In South Africa, with the apartheid regime, in the United States, in the southern states, of course, and a lot of, you know, progressive young people in Sweden, they were really engaged in different anti-racist or anti-colonial movements, but they didn't think of Sweden as a place where this also happens. So Katarina really made people confront the problems that we had in Sweden.
I think, thank you. That was a good summary of a life's achievement. I think we can move to the next scene. I suggest we watch the scene about Katarina and I think Rosa, both of them taking part in a film. Yeah.
Då fanns det ett konditori som bakade de godaste bakelserna du kan tänka dig i Stockholm. Katarina och jag gick ofta dit när vi träffades. Och så sitter vi en dag på konditoriet och så säger Katarina: Suxdorf, Arne Suxdorf. Katarina skulle kunna få vara med i en film som han hade tänkt att göra om romerna. Då har de genom Arne Sukstor film får reda på att det finns det 2 flickor, Taikon, som ska få vara med i filmen Smeder på luffen.
Tröttsamt att gå, va? Hopp med oss.
Somos oss, ja lenta.
Haji liket romat, ha?
Saeki, haji. Ja, tack.
Varsågoda och hoppa upp i sked. Ja.
Vi pratade ju då som jag pratar nu. Svenska.
Är det här eran vagnen?
Nej.
Och då säger han som gjorde filmen: nej flickor. Vi måste prata lite annorlunda. Vad då annorlunda? Ska vi prata ett annat språk? Ska vi prata på romanet? Nej, men ni ska inte artikulera er så där väldigt väl. Ja, men det är ju vårt sätt att prata. Ja, men då blir det inte trovärdigt.
Sorry, we have one more question, but before we move to that, I just thought this is such a rare moment where scenes from a film are confronted to the people who are forced to perform in a stereotypical role. I think this is it makes you feel ashamed somehow watching this and hearing how a woman who is such an accomplished writer was forced to play a role of someone speaking that Swedish. How do the girls sound in the film, and how did you feel about that? I mean, I don't know. I just thought it shows so much the contrast between who the people are and how they are perceived, and how they are perceived with the gaze of the camera, which has much more power than just the individual.
Yes, so I did not know about this film. You know, Rosa was the one who told me about this. So the first time I went into the archive and I watched this, I was shocked because I thought, oh, you know, the kind of production of these images of, you know, really the other, if we could use that word, you know, it's being done exactly, you know, in this moment right here, because what happens in that scene is that, you know, when they step in onto that carriage, they don't speak the usual Swedish that they speak, you know, you would say they speak broken Swedish. So they even say something incorrect. And so here Rosa really just says, you know, they think that that's us. And to me, you know, I really, we talked about this a lot, because also when we discussed this thing with the films, because, you know, they had been in this first film and then one thing led to another. They did these small parts in different films in different places. And so she told me that they went to see another film that they had both been in. And they had invited also some of the older Roma people, you know, and then so this older lady had said to Rosa, oh, okay, like now we're here, now we're sitting, you know, we're gonna watch this new film. Let's see what they're gonna like make up about us now. And I just thought, you know, so this is like them going to the movies, you know, in the beginning of the 50s. And there is absolutely a clear understanding that there are being stereotypes produced about them. And this is just basic knowledge, you know, if you're a Roma person, even in the 50s. So just to give you a little context.
I read an angry letter of an American filmmaker somewhere, I think from the 20s. And again, he was complaining that people want stereotypes or familiar images. So he's allowed to show Roma only in a certain way. And if they live in a different way, much more modern, it's a no longer acceptable image. I mean, it comes from even earlier. And
amazing.
I was talking to Roma actresses recently, one from Bulgaria, Natalia Cekova, and one from Portugal, Maria Gil. And both of them are open about their background, and they say that they are Romani. And the interesting thing is then that you get only roles then as a Romani. You can't play anything else but your ethnicity, which I think is still such a sort of blindness. And Natalia Cekova, the Bulgarian actress, was saying that she often has to refuse roles because she's given roles of a mother who is selling her children or who is trading with children. And she says, what kind of message is this film disseminating, and I don't want to be part of it. Who is it enriching? For whom? Who does it do benefit to? Nobody. But just to highlight how much film has contributed to this. I don't know how to call it. This kind of dehumanization. This form of blindness, ignorant blindness that then breeds violence and breeds poverty and nothing good. But we have one more question here, which brings us back to the issue of politics. It's 50 years since the first World Romani Congress in 1971 this year. That's the question. How much do you think Katarina influenced that as a civil rights leader? And then the question continues, do you think that Sweden needs more people like Katarina Taikon? Or do you think Sweden learned from her and there are no other issues in there who need to change?
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Yeah, that's a really good question. In the research that I have been doing, I haven't seen, signs of like correspondence with activists outside of Sweden, for example. That hasn't been so clear to my knowledge, but I do know that Katarina Taikon maybe it was in 1970, 1971, she did sort of like a trip in Europe with 2-3 other friends who were also activists, and they went to some countries to meet with both community organizers, activists, and people on some kind of political level. So this is something that still maybe needs to be looked into. What was her relationship to people in other places, and especially in the 1971 conference. So that's a great question. And the second one about, do we need Katarina Taikon today? I do think we need. I think it's very hard for somebody if they would like to, take that role, because, Katarina was really such a special character. But the kind of organizing that she did, and also the kind of like sort of educational approach that she had to things, I think definitely. I think also, you know, during her time, there were, for example, really no laws against discrimination. You could go into a restaurant and they could kick you out, and there was no law to protect you. So, I mean, I think that would be, she definitely brought that up in her time. And she was very early on these issues. But I think for today, you know, for example, those things could be much, much harder pushed than they are today. And I would think, you know, in general, thinking about how the equality issues in Sweden, you know, according to ethnic background, racial background, all of these things are definitely things that we're struggling with.
Well, maybe I can add something here. Like watching the film, I thought that, for example, the protests against Abschiebung in German, relocation of Roma to their original countries, that they were protesting, like they were fighting for this French family to stay in Sweden with these cute kids that got this special help. I really like this part of the film, and I thought it's not very different from today. And I also thought that we still even have today this image of Sweden of being a paradise on earth, like a country where many aspects of human life are taken care of. But I had a very kind of upsetting experience last summer in Stockholm. I was visiting friends there, and through them I could learn that Roma from Bulgaria, maybe also from Romania, were kind of shipped to Sweden as workers, and they had to collect these blueberries somewhere in the forest. And the person who hired those people was actually banned from doing business because he was acquitted of being of having like bad practices. So he took those people somewhere in the forest far away. They weren't paid, but they had to work. And after a while, one of them apparently couldn't stand the situation, was probably a bit more emotional, and so he turned up in front of the Bulgarian embassy, and he had no money, he had nowhere to go. So the Bulgarian ambassador paid with his own money his plane to Bulgaria so he could go back to his family. And usually what happens with these people who are lied to, they end up in the social services in Sweden, who take care of them for a while, and then they got shipped back to Bulgaria. And these are cases that are not investigated, and that also kind of are like a stain on, say, Bulgarians or Romanians, and also a burden that, like a financial burden they have to take care of. And I thought, I can't believe, I really can't believe that such things are happening.
Yes, this is absolutely true. And this has been going on for many years. So, you know, they kind of have people come here and think that there's a good agreement and they're gonna get paid, you know, in a like proper way and things. But there are terrible, terrible stories from the people who really take these jobs and think that this might be a good, you know, job situation for them. And this is so true. You know, this is going on in Sweden today. There are things that are absolutely, you know, unregulated, and also, as you said, not even prioritized to be looked into.
Yeah.
So this is a real issue.
Yeah. Okay, let's Let's change a little bit the topic. We were talking that Rosa Taikon is celebrated in an exhibition of her silver work, and that you also wrote an article for the catalog. Maybe you can tell us a little bit more about this exhibition. I don't think we'll be able to visit it, so it'll be good to hear what's happening right now it's not in Stockholm, was it?
Exactly, it's not in Stockholm. It's in a town 3 hours from Stockholm, to the north. And so, Rosa, she passed away 4 years ago, and she lived to become 91, and she was active really to the end. And I think a reason she, lived that long was also that she really loved her work. During her lifetime, she was absolutely, celebrated for her work as a silversmith, as an artist. And so when she passed away, her studio, her workshop, was donated to this museum in this Swedish town. The town is called Hudiksvall. Nobody will remember this, but anyway. So the museum there, they wanted to have her workshop, and they installed it as a permanent exhibition. And so right now, there's a sort of like a retrospective of her work. You can see, her silver work. She did all kinds of beautiful things. And this is up, I think, for maybe some more months. And I think, when I listen to the other people who really have looked into Rosa's work, through maybe sort of like an artistic perspective, they always say that the work that Rosa did was really never looked upon in like aesthetic terms. It was always kind of like, she had Roma background, and so she did this work, and she modernized, the kind of like the Roma tradition, sort of say. But I think that now there's a younger generation who wants to also look at Rosa's work with new eyes, and also see her as some kind of like, really like a modernist pioneer for, the stuff that she did. And also, I just want to say that whenever you met Rosa, she never really talked about her work as an artist. She always wanted to talk about, what's going on in the world, what's going on in society. She was really like, engaged, and she was always wanted to, be in conversation with younger people and stuff. So sometimes you forget that she was this really prominent artist. But I don't think, the people who appreciate her work has forgotten, because it's very extraordinary work.
She's so great on the camera. I find it's so nice to listen to her, even though I don't understand Swedish, and to look at her, and she looks like a great storyteller. And I have a little bit the suspicion that it's also through your work that her work is evaluated in a new light.
Well, I mean, I wouldn't dare to say that. That is so nice of you. But, I think what needed to be happen was that, a lot of different people from a new generation would really look at both of these sisters' work and their contribution, because, for many years, Rosa in Sweden, even though she's this, I mean, as you say, like, just by looking at her, you can tell that she is so interesting, so alive, and so intelligent. You know, she was looked upon for some years as like, yeah, she's a little bit too much, you know, this like older crazy lady, because she was so persistent in, you know, these issues and like talking about really the racism in Sweden that Swedish people, they don't want to acknowledge. So I think it's time that, you know, we start seeing them for all the amazing groundbreaking work that they did, and they really changed so much in Sweden.
We also wanted to show one scene where Katarina Taikon is reading from Katitzi, the children's book series, which she was working on for more than 10 years. It's 13 volumes. I think it was translated twice in Germany. There's this German teacher and scholar Ute Wolters who wrote on the reception of Katitzi in Germany, and who also translated the first version of Taikon, the film, so we could show it. We showed it 2017 in Berlin. I think it was one of the first screenings of the film. I'm speaking quick because we have another few minutes. Oh, here comes the scene. Okay.
Majen, ropade Kalle triumferande. Det är en lus på min bänk. Magister Engdahl slog pekpinnen i Elsas bänk så att en bit flög av och hamnade i Bojans knä. Jag tolererar inga busfasoner. Är det uppfattat? Ta om det där från början. Magister Engdahl, jag sa bara att det är en lus på min bänk. Vad säger du? Har du löss? Nej, inte jag. Hon, sa Kalle och pekade. Alla vände sig om och stirrade på Katitzi. Magister Engdahl fick en rynka mellan ögonbrynen och gick fram till Katitzi. Han drog henne upp ur bänken, grep tag i hennes hår och synade henne noga. Jaha, det stämmer. Zigenare i skolan, löss på alla kanter. Det gjorde ont när magister Engdahl drog Katitzi i håret. Ilskan sköd i henne och rasande bet hon honom i handen. Aj, vad tar du det till med, zigenarunge? Vet du inte hut? Läraren slog Katitzi hårt i ansiktet. Katitzi log föraktfullt, så spottade hon på honom. Katitzi såg allt sammans framför sig. Hon hade inga möjligheter här i skolan. Här skulle hon aldrig lära sig läsa och skriva. Katitzi gick fram till läraren, satte händerna i sidorna och såg honom stint i ögonen. Ballå, svin, sa hon och vände på klacken och gick med rak rygg ut genom klassrummet.
I'm very curious how this sounds in Swedish, because it's so important what language you use. I think it's not easy to reach children. Language, it's not just the story, it's the language itself. And she had enormous success for years.
Yes, so you're absolutely right. The Katitzi series, which is, you know, based on her life from 6-year-olds to 15, they were extremely popular in Sweden. They became, you know, part of main culture, part of popular culture. And so I think what is so special about the Katitzi series is that they are told through the eyes of the child, and they are so loyal to that gaze. And I think that's why children love Katitzi. You know, when I'm out in Sweden meeting people and stuff, I will have these like 40-year-old, 45-year-old, 50-year-old women coming up to me and say, I read Katitzi, you know, it changed my life. I identified with Katitzi, or I identified with Rosa. And so this has like really touched generations of readers. And I think also, I mean, as we saw in this clip, you know, Katarina didn't avoid difficult issues. She really wrote about them, both sort of like as like, you know, events, as incidents, but also you could feel what Katitzi feels in that moment where everybody stares at her and the teacher treats her like that. So I think that was really the strength of Katitzi. And of course, they're also not only about these moments where, you know, they, you know, are being treated bad, or, you know, when the racism just comes out. It's also really about, you know, Katitzi being such an active child. She's really curious, you know, she will not just take an answer from the adults, she will question adults, you know. And so it's really the whole world of this child.
I think it's not an easy achievement to become famous with a children's book in the country of Astrid Lindgren.
Yes, exactly.
But I think we've reached the limit of our time, an hour and a half. I would invite Linda and Ursula to come back. Maybe they can share also their fascination with Katitzi. And yes, here they are.
Lawen and Radmila, thank you very much for this very interesting introduction to Katarina Taikon and her achievements and her book. It was really interesting. Thank you a lot.
It was a pleasure.
Yeah, such an informative and inspiring evening. We are very thankful. And yeah.
Everybody, watch the movie, watch the whole movie. You can watch it until Sunday 6 on the AKE DIKHEA website. It's really, yeah, you probably got an impression through the scenes. Read the book. It's also, you can, it's in English, but yeah, you are all fluent. So thank you very much, Radmila and Lawen. Thank you all, audience in the World Wide Web.
Yes, and as allies, we also wanted to say that we are very thankful that you told us the untold story of Katarina and also her sister Rosa. And we will take care of continue talking about her and continue the things she fought for, because I think there's so much more to learn about this feminist icon. And we are very thankful that you shared your expertise and your work and your thoughts and emotions with us. So I think in the name of the World Wide Web, we can say thank you very much.
Thank you, guys. I also just want to say thanks for this opportunity. And I'm so glad that there's interest, you know, in Katarina and Rosa's life, also, you know, outside of Sweden. It makes me so happy for these connections, because I feel like, you know, once you meet those two sisters, you sort of, yeah, you're being opened up. And as you said, Radmila, it really gives you inspiration. It lifts you.
Well, I hope that we have channeled some of the inspiration that's coming from Katarina. And I really hope that, there are more such films coming.
Yes.
That would be something that's really needed. And it's not like there are not people to be talked about and presented and admired.
Yeah. I'm sure there will be more films about other important activists.
So now we are already over the time. So thanks a lot. Have a nice evening and see you.
Thank you, guys.
See you. Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.
Ciao.
Bye.
Bleiben wir aber noch drin und gehen gleich nochmal, wenn wir raus sind.